Jessa Vaughn winced as the horrible crunch echoed through the underground parking garage. "No, no, no," she whispered, looking at the silver car's back bumper now sporting a fresh dent the size of a grapefruit. She looked at her own beat-up hatchback. Barely a scratch, of course. She glanced around, heart pounding. The luxury car she'd just accidentally tapped was parked slightly over the line. Still, she'd been reversing too fast. Her stomach churned. It wasn't just any car, it was a Bentley. A sleek, silver Bentley. "Oh, this is bad," she muttered, tugging her tote higher on her shoulder and crouching to inspect the damage. "I can't afford this. I can't even afford my next electric bill." Still, she wasn't the type to run. Jessa pulled out a pen and a crumpled receipt from her bag, scribbled her name and phone number on the back and tucked it under the wiper blade. "I dented your car. I'm sorry. Please call me so I can make it right. Jessa V." She stood there staring at the note for a second longer, then let out a breath and rushed toward the elevator. She had exactly 30 seconds to make it to the lobby before she was late to her second job interview this week. Tristan Prescott narrowed his eyes at the dent on his bumper, then at the note fluttering in the breeze. He'd just gotten back from a board meeting that made him want to throw a chair through a window, and now this. He pulled the receipt from the wiper and read the short message. The handwriting was messy, slanted. "Honest, Jessa V," he muttered under his breath. His driver, Marcus, cleared his throat. "Want me to handle it?" "No." Tristan folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't know why, but something about it intrigued him. Maybe it was the directness of it. Or maybe it was the fact that someone had the guts to scratch a Bentley and actually leave a note behind. He walked around the back of the car again. It wasn't that bad. He could fix it by tomorrow. Still, he wanted to see what kind of person owned up to something like this. Jessa stood at the counter of the tiny coffee shop where she worked part-time, wiping down the espresso machine while trying not to think about the Bentley. Or the fact that her rent was due next week. Or that her interview went terribly because she accidentally called the hiring manager Mom. Then the bell above the door jingled. She looked up. A man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her entire yearly income. His jawline was sharp, his hair dark and slightly tousled, as if he'd just run a hand through it out of frustration. He looked around the shop like he didn't belong, which he didn't. Then his gaze landed on her. "You're Jessa V?" he asked. Her heart sank. "Oh no." "You're the car guy," he raised an eyebrow. "The car guy, the Bentley," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I left the note. I'm so sorry. I didn't see how close I was. I'll pay for the damage. I mean, not right away, but I'll start. Like a payment plan. Or maybe I can work it off or something." He didn't say anything for a second, just looked at her. "You were the only one parked over the line," she said, trying to joke. "So technically." "You hit a $200,000 vehicle," he said calmly. She went pale. 200, he stepped forward. "But you left a note. Most people would have driven off." "I'm not most people," she said quickly, then realized how defensive that sounded. "I just mean I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." He nodded slowly, then stretched out his hand. "Tristan Prescott." She shook it, her fingers disappearing in his grip. "Jessa Vaughn." Something flickered in his eyes. "You know what? Forget the dent," she blinked. "Wait, what? I'll have it fixed. You don't need to worry about it." "But why?" he shrugged. "Because you're honest." "That's rare, and because I want to offer you something different," she frowned. "What kind of different are we talking about? Because I can't go to jail over a car dent," he laughed. It was deep, unexpected. "I run Prescott & Co., the investment firm downtown. One of our charity partners is hosting a gala next week and we need help organizing. You seem capable, and I want someone I can trust. Come work it. It pays well." She stared at him. "You want me to work a gala because I dented your car? Call it a strange form of recruitment," he said, already reaching into his jacket for a sleek black card. "Text the assistant on the back. She'll get you the details." She hesitated. "I'm a barista." "Then you already know how to handle high-maintenance people. You'll be perfect." The night of the gala, Jessa pulled at the hem of her black dress and tried not to look like she'd rather be anywhere else. The event was held at a glass-walled rooftop in the center of Manhattan. The skyline sparkled behind her like something out of a movie. She'd never seen anything like it. Tristan was across the room, talking to a group of investors. He was magnetic, dressed in a tailored tuxedo, every movement confident and intentional. He looked like he belonged in this world. She didn't. Still, he caught her eye and smiled just for a second. It was the kind of smile that made her forget she was standing next to a tray of shrimp cocktail. Later that night, as the guests thinned out and the music slowed, he found her near the railing, hugging her arms against the cold. "You did great tonight," he said, handing her a flute of champagne. "I didn't drop a tray on anyone's head, so I consider it a win." He leaned beside her, quiet for a beat, then said, "You don't belong behind a counter, you know." She looked up at him. "You don't even know me. I know you owned up to a mistake. That says a lot." He was close now, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne and something else, something warm. She looked away. "I'm not used to this kind of thing." "What kind of thing?" "Fancy suits. Rooftop parties. Champagne that costs more than my shoes." He chuckled. "It's all just noise. Most people in this room would never have left a note." She turned to him. "Why are you being so nice to me?" He met her gaze. "I don't know yet, but I want to find out." Her heart thudded in her chest. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to run. The next morning, Jessa stood in front of her mirror, brushing her hair with one hand and gripping the bathroom sink with the other. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she stared at it like it might judge her for what she was about to do. She hadn't planned to take the job. But after the gala, something shifted. Not just in her circumstances, though the generous paycheck she received at the end of the night had nearly made her cry, but in her. Tristan Prescott had seen something in her, something she didn't know she still had. And now, against every instinct that whispered she didn't belong in that world, she was standing in front of her mirror, about to walk into his office for a short-term role his assistant had called project coordination, whatever that meant. She arrived at the towering glass building just before 9, clutching the visitor badge she'd been given in the lobby. As the elevator opened on the top floor, she stepped out into a space that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a workplace. Dark wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and sleek, minimalist furniture surrounded her. A receptionist nodded toward a glass door just ahead. Inside, Tristan sat behind a wide desk, a tablet in one hand, a sharp navy suit clinging to his frame like it had been made for him, which she suspected it had. "You're early," he said, glancing up. "You said 9. I said around 9. Most people interpret that as 10. She stepped closer, crossing the thick carpet slowly. "I'm not most people." He set the tablet down. "No, you're not." She tilted her head slightly. "So what exactly did I agree to? Because your assistant was vague. Something about a new venture and needing someone with unfiltered instincts. I don't even know what that means." "You'll be shadowing me," he said, standing and walking to a side table where a stack of folders waited. "I'm launching a philanthropic branch under Prescott & Co. It's been in the works for months, but the internal proposals are all the same: safe, strategic, expected. I want someone who doesn't think like them." She blinked. "So you want me to give you ideas?" "I want you to challenge mine." She folded her arms. "Why me?" He handed her a folder. "Because you're not polished, you're not calculating, and you say what you mean. That's rare." She looked down at the thick folder labeled Prescott Impact. "And if I say something you don't like, I'll listen," he said. "Then I'll argue, then I'll probably ignore it. But I'll remember it." She stared at the folder. "You're not exactly the type who takes criticism." He leaned one shoulder against the desk. "You'd be surprised." She opened the folder and scanned the first few pages: clean graphics, demographic breakdowns, overly optimistic language. "This says you want to launch a mentorship program in underfunded schools," she said. "Yes. And you plan to do that by flying in guest speakers from Silicon Valley." He nodded. She set the folder down. "That's a terrible idea." His brow lifted. "Why?" "Because it's performative," she said. "You want to inspire kids who have never touched a coding program by giving them a 1-hour lecture from someone in a suit who doesn't speak their language. That's not mentoring. That's marketing." He didn't respond right away, just studied her. "You want to change lives," she pressed. "Bring in someone who grew up in the same neighborhood and built something from scratch. Someone they can see themselves in, not another billionaire flying in on a jet." He moved back to his desk slowly. "You're hired." "I thought I was already hired." You were on probation. Now it's official. She narrowed her eyes. So I challenge your ego and you give me a promotion. I like people who tell the truth, he said. Even when it's inconvenient. That afternoon, she followed him through a series of meetings. Investors, board members, department heads, each one more intimidating than the last. But Tristan didn't coddle her. He introduced her by name, asked for her input, and never once looked at her like she didn't belong. After hours of back-to-back briefings, they stepped into the elevator. The doors closed and the silence between them felt different now, not awkward, just charged. You didn't have to bring me to those meetings, she said quietly. I did. Why? Because you were right, he said. About the mentorship program. About the need for authenticity. She glanced sideways at him. You're not what I expected. He looked down at her. What did you expect? Someone who throws money at problems and calls it charity. He leaned against the mirrored wall of the elevator. I've done that before. It doesn't work. She turned toward him, curiosity flickering behind her eyes. Why does this project matter so much to you? There was a pause. Then, because I grew up watching my mother take 3 buses to work. Because I know what it's like to have talent and no opportunity. She hadn't expected that. You don't talk about that in interviews, she said softly. I don't talk about that to anyone, he replied. When the doors opened, neither of them moved right away. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Inside, something between them had shifted again subtly, but undeniably. That evening, as she rode the subway home, Jessa stared at her reflection in the window. Her hair was a little frizzy from the humidity, and her heels pinched her toes, but her eyes looked different, clearer, steadier. She knew this job wouldn't last forever. She was temporary, a detour in a life that had been stuck in survival mode for too long. But something about Tristan Prescott made her wonder what it would be like to stop surviving and start living. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like she was right where she was supposed to be. Jessa hadn't seen him in 3 days, not that she was counting, or checking the clock every hour, or replaying their last elevator ride in her head like it was a scene from a movie. She was just noticing. That's all. Since Tristan had flown out for meetings in Singapore, she'd been directing the early stage planning for the mentorship initiative solo. His assistant left her with a schedule, a budget, and a list of contacts who didn't like being told their expensive marketing strategies were out of touch. Jessa had never been in charge of anything more than a shift change, but somehow she wasn't drowning, she was swimming. Her ideas were gaining traction. Small adjustments like hiring real educators from the communities they hoped to serve had started to reshape the project. She'd even convinced the branding team to scrap the glossy campaign video in favor of short interviews with local teens. Still, every time she walked past his office, empty and silent except for the soft hum of the air vent, something in her tightened. She hadn't realized how much she'd come to rely on the way he looked at her when she spoke. Like her ideas weren't just valid, they were necessary. On Friday afternoon, as she was organizing files in the conference room, the door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. Do you need a minute? She asked, still halfway through alphabetizing a stack of grant proposals. I need more than a minute, Tristan said. She dropped the papers. He crossed the room while she scrambled to gather them. You could have warned me you were going to rewrite the entire mentorship protocol while I was gone. You left a vacuum. I filled it and convinced 3 board members to double the budget. I showed them the numbers. I read your presentation, he said. Twice, she looked up, and he leaned against the table. It was better than anything I've seen from people with 4 times your experience. She pressed her lips together, trying not to let the warmth in her chest show. I didn't want to wait for permission. I didn't want you to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked, how was Singapore? Hot, formal, predictable. You hate predictable. I do. She sat back on her heels. Then maybe you should let me keep shaking things up. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. Is that all you want to shake up? Jessa froze. He wasn't looking at her like a boss. He hadn't in a while, but this was different. This was a line. She stood, brushing her skirt smooth. You're not supposed to ask me things like that. And yet here we are. I work for you. You work with me. She walked toward the window, needing space. This isn't the kind of story that ends well. What kind of story do you think this is? The kind where a girl from nowhere gets in too deep with a man who can buy and sell the world. He followed her. You think that's who I am? I think you live in a world I don't understand. Then let me show it to you. She turned. What does that mean? Tonight, come with me, to where, you'll see. She should have said no. She should have reminded him of boundaries and power dynamics, and everything she'd promised herself she wouldn't risk. But when she looked at him, really looked, there was something in his eyes that made her forget every rule she'd ever set. Fine, she said. But if this ends with a helicopter ride, I'm not getting in. I watch the news. No helicopters, he said. Just dinner. Later, as the car pulled up to a softly lit townhouse in the West Village, Jessa stared out the window. This isn't a restaurant, she said. No, it's not. She stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the cobblestone. Inside, the house was warm and quiet. A fire crackled in the hearth. A long table was set for two. Candles flickered. Classical music drifted from the corners. Is this your house? She asked, stunned. No, he said. It was my mother's. I kept it the way it was. She turned to him. Why bring me here? Because I've never brought anyone here. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. Over dinner, he told her stories she never expected. About the scholarship that changed his life. The professor who'd once told him he was too blunt to lead. The time he nearly lost everything because he trusted the wrong partner. She listened. And then, when he asked about her, she answered. She told him about growing up in a one-bedroom apartment with her grandmother, about losing her mother too young, about how she'd always felt like she was one step behind everyone else. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He just watched her like her words mattered. After dessert, he walked her to the door. I should go, she said, her voice quieter now. I know, she hesitated. This changes things. It doesn't have to, but it will. He reached for her hand. Then let it change them. She looked down at their fingers. I don't know what happens next. I do. And then, for the first time, he kissed her. It was slow, intentional, like he'd been waiting. When it ended, she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was too full. Her thoughts too loud. He opened the door. Let me take you home, he said. She shook her head. Not tonight. His brow lifted slightly. I need to think, she said. I need to be sure. He nodded once. I'll wait. As she stepped into the night air, Jessa knew everything had changed, and for the first time, she didn't want to stop it. Rain streaked down the windows of Tristan's office as he stood at the wall of glass, staring out at the city, phone pressed to his ear. Reschedule the Tokyo call, he said. Push the Zurich brief to next week. I'm not leaving the country this month. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. Behind him, the door clicked open. Jessa stepped in, her coat damp from the storm, umbrella dripping slightly onto the marble floor. Her hair curled at the edges from the weather, and a worn leather folder was tucked under her arm. You're not in Singapore, she said. I didn't go, she hesitated, because of me. Because I didn't want to miss this week. The pilot school visits tomorrow. You've been building toward it. I wanted to see it through. She walked farther into the room, setting the folder on the desk. You didn't call, she said. After that night. I wanted to, he replied, but I knew if I did, I'd say things you weren't ready to hear. She looked up at him. Try me, he crossed the room slowly. I can't pretend this is just about work anymore. I've gone through my entire career keeping personal and professional separate, but then you walked in and rewrote every rule I'd spent years building. Jessa didn't look away. I've never had someone like you see me, not like this. He reached out, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. Then let me keep seeing you. She closed her eyes for a second. I'm scared, Tristan, I know. What if this all falls apart? Then we rebuild it. Her voice wavered. I don't want to be something temporary. You're not. She took a breath, eyes searching his. Then prove it. He nodded once, then stepped back and pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. From inside, he lifted a small, rectangular box wrapped in navy paper. He handed it to her without a word. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a brass key inside. What is this? To the townhouse, he said. It's yours, not as a gift, as a place, a constant, somewhere that's yours even if everything else changes. She stared at it. Why would you do this? Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to land. And because I want you to know that whatever happens, you have a place in my world. Her fingers tightened around the key. I don't need a house to believe in us. He stepped closer again. Then believe in this. The next day, they stood side by side in the courtyard of a public high school in Harlem as students filed in, eyes wide as they passed the banner for the new mentorship program. Tristan turned to her. "You nervous?" "No," she said. "I'm ready." Inside, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Local leaders, teachers, and students filled the seats. Jessa stepped up to the podium, the microphone squealing briefly before settling. She looked out at the crowd, then back at Tristan, who stood at the edge of the stage, arms crossed, watching her like she was the only person in the room. "When I was 17, she began, "I thought opportunity was something you were either born with or spent your life chasing. I didn't know it could find you when you least expected it, or that it could come in the form of someone who saw potential where you didn't." She glanced at him again, voice steady now. "This program isn't about giving charity, it's about giving trust. It's about believing that someone's past doesn't define their future, and it's about showing up. Not once, but again and again." The crowd erupted into applause. That night, back at the townhouse, Jessa stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta while Tristan set the table with mismatched dishes she'd found in the cupboard. "I still can't believe it went so well," she said, ladling sauce onto their plates. "You earned it," he said. "Every second of it." She slid into the chair across from him. "You know, I'm not going back to the coffee shop." He raised an eyebrow. "You were still considering that." "I was, but not anymore." He twirled his fork. "So what now? You take over my foundation, maybe. Or maybe I start my own," she said, eyes glinting. "Something grassroots, something messy, something real." He smiled. "I'll invest. I'll ask for double. You'll get it." After dinner, they sat on the couch, the fire crackling low. Jessa leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think people like you lived on another planet," she said softly. "Suits, jets, glass offices. I thought you'd never even notice someone like me." "I noticed," he said. "The second you left that note," she laughed. "It was on the back of a donut receipt. I was mortified. It was honest and brave, like you." She turned to face him. "So what happens now?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin band of gold. Simple, elegant, no diamonds, no flash, just real. Her breath caught. "It's not about status," he said. "It's not about fixing your life or changing mine. It's about building something new together. I don't care if we're in a boardroom or a bodega. I just want to be where you are." She stared at the ring, then back at him. "I dented your car," she whispered. "That's how this started. And now you're everything I never knew I needed." His voice was quiet, steady. She nodded, tears brimming. "Yes," she said. "Yes to everything." He slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her like it was already forever, and this time she didn't run, she stayed. Jessa adjusted the lapel of her blazer as she stepped into the bustling atrium of the new community center in Brooklyn. The soft hum of conversation echoed through the glass ceiling space, where families, local leaders, and volunteers gathered in clusters. Students darted between booths, eyes wide as they explored stations for mentorship sign-ups, coding demos, and art exhibits, all of it free, all of it real. The doors had only been open for 20 minutes, and already the place buzzed with life. She barely noticed Tristan entering behind her until she felt a warm hand at the small of her back. "You remembered to breathe today?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "I'm considering it," she replied, glancing at him. "But if one more person tells me I should be on the cover of a nonprofit magazine, I might pass out." He looked around. "You made this happen." "No," she corrected, watching a group of teenagers huddle around a robotics table. "We did." He leaned in, brushing his lips against her temple. "And it's only the beginning." The opening of the Prescott Community Initiative Center marked the culmination of 6 months of tireless planning, months that had reshaped every part of Jessa's life. She'd stepped beyond a world that once felt too polished, too untouchable, and built something that belonged to her. Something lasting, outside of the ribbon cuttings and donor handshakes. Her life with Tristan had settled into something beautifully chaotic. Morning coffee shared in mismatched mugs. Late nights debating program budgets, and then forgetting about them entirely when he pulled her into his arms. They'd gone from two people on opposite ends of the world to partners who couldn't imagine a day without each other. "Board meeting in 20, he said, lifting a brow. She groaned. "Do I have to wear heels for that?" No, he said, but I can't promise I won't be distracted if you don't. She laughed as a staffer waved her over. I'll be right back. He watched her go, her stride confident, her voice already animated as she engaged with volunteers. There was nothing cautious about her anymore. She had stepped into her power like she was born for it. Later that evening, as the last of the guests left and the cleanup crew began stacking chairs, Tristan stood by the windows, phone to his ear. I want the funding extended through next year. No restrictions, he said, and make sure the expansion sites in Detroit and Oakland are greenlit. Jessa's team needs full control. He ended the call as she approached, barefoot now, her shoes dangling from her fingers. I don't trust you when you look that pleased with yourself, she said. I just made a few calls. You promised no calls tonight. I lied. She nudged his shoulder. You're supposed to be learning boundaries. I'm learning that mine start and end with you. She arched a brow. That's cheesy. And true. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded envelope. What's this? Open it. She slipped a finger under the seal and pulled out a single sheet, a purchase agreement for a brownstone in Harlem. The buyer's name read, Jessa Vaughn. Her eyes lifted. I wanted you to have a place that's yours, he said. Not inherited, not borrowed, yours. It's a fixer-upper, but I figured we could do it together. She blinked, stunned. You're giving me a home, I'm offering you a future. She stepped forward. You already gave me that. He took her hand. Not all of it. He dropped to one knee. She froze. I don't care how untraditional this has been. I don't care that it started with a dent or that you wore sneakers to your first board pitch. I just care that it ends with me waking up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Tears filled her eyes. I already said yes, she whispered. Say it again. Yes. He slid a second ring onto her finger, this one delicate, platinum, a small sapphire in the center. She stared at it, then at him, and pulled him to his feet. You're mine now, she said, always was. That night, they didn't celebrate with champagne or fireworks. They curled up on the couch of the old townhouse, wrapped in a blanket, takeout containers balanced on their laps, and a dog-eared floor plan of their new home spread across the coffee table. I want to knock out that wall, she said, pointing to the sketch. Only if we keep the exposed brick. You're such a cliché, and you love it. Unfortunately, he reached for her hand. We'll build more than a house. We already are. The months that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had ever known before. They renovated the brownstone together, arguing over paint colors, dancing barefoot on newly sanded floors, writing their future into every corner. The mentorship program expanded to 5 cities, then 10. Jessa took over as director, while Tristan stepped back from daily operations, choosing instead to invest in other voices, other visions. Their wedding was small, just 30 guests in the garden of the new brownstone, string lights above their heads, jazz humming in the background. Jessa wore a dress with pockets. Tristan wore no tie. They wrote their own vows while sipping coffee that morning, and neither of them cried until the dog ring bearer wandered off mid-ceremony. Afterward, they danced in the street with their neighbors, the city buzzing around them. Years later, the wall of Jessa's office held a single-framed artifact, tucked between awards and photos. The crumpled donut receipt with the note she'd left on his windshield. She never replaced it. It was the start of everything.